Hi, everyone. So today I'm teaming up with Zero Hedge again to discuss a topic that I think many people love to debate, but I think most people really don't understand the nuances of it and why it's such a complex but also dividing topic. And that's whether what's happening in Gaza can be considered genocide. We've got Professor Bartov and Professor Morris. Both of you are experts when it comes to this topic, yet you agree on some things, but don't agree on whether it can be counted or considered genocide. So, Professor Bartov, you're an Israeli-American professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. You're also a former IDF soldier and company commander. You grew up in Israel and identified in the past as Zionist, but that stance has shifted since. Professor Morris, you're an Israeli historian and professor at Ben Gurion University. You're known as one of the new historians for your work in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the Palestinian Exodus. You have a background in Zionist history and have also served in the IDF. You also grew up in Israel. I think you're in Israel right now. And you've also identified in the past as a Zionist, but that stance has also matured over time. You do not, Professor Morris, you do not believe that Israel is committing genocide. And Professor Bartov, your view has shifted. And as of a few months ago, you do consider what's happening in Gaza as genocide. First off, gentlemen, pleasure to have you both. Was my introduction accurate?
Yeah, pretty good. Thank you.
Yeah. So what I want to start with, again, as I said, this is going to be a very interesting topic for me because I'm going to learn a lot and maybe I'll finally have an opinion on the matter. I want to start at maybe Professor Bartov and then Professor Morris. Let's start with what is a war crime and what is genocide? How do these two differ? And then we'll go to Benny, we'll go to you and compare ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity and genocide.
Okay, so thank you for hosting this. And hello, Benny. I think we last met in 2022, just before everything happened, I think.
Yeah.
So war crimes are severe breaches of the laws and customs of war. So the one important thing to understand about war crimes is, first of all, that, of course, they have to happen at a time of war because they're war crimes. And they can be actions taken both against soldiers and against civilians. The most important element of war crimes that may be relevant to our discussion today are, I would say, two things. One is the issue of proportionality. And that means, are you using the right amount of force to accomplish a particular military goal? And it can be a larger goal, it can be a very specific goal. So if, for instance, there is a school, and that school is now used to shelter people who have been displaced from an area of operations on orders of the army that is carrying out these operations. He told them, you go to this school, this is a safe zone. And people go to that school, say there are 200 people there, civilians. And then that army identifies that under, or suspects that under that building, in a tunnel, there may be 2 or 3 or 5 of its enemies, militants, and it decides that it has to kill them. And it uses a 2,000-pound bomb in order to do that, and it drops it on the school with the hope that it would kill those people underground. But in the process, it kills, say, 50 civilians and wounds 150. Is that proportionate to the goal? One would assume, but that would obviously have to be adjudicated, that is not. And therefore, that could constitute a war crime. And arguably, of course, in the war that we're talking about, there were many, many such cases. And that's one reason there were very heavy civilian losses. One other thing, just to explain, another element of war crimes is displacement of population is a war crime. Forcible displacement of population is a war crime. And the use of starvation, of deprivation of food and water from a population under your military occupation is a war crime. And that's actually crimes that the ICC has charged both the former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, with.
And Professor, to compare that to genocide, genocide essentially requires intent. So for something that is a war crime to qualify to be considered genocidal, there has to be an intent, and I'll go to the definition here, an intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So this is where the line is drawn between the two. Professor Morris, I want to add two more categories to the discussion because we might use those. A lot of people conflate those terms. And that's crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing, and the difference between those two and genocide.
I don't know. I'm not sure that this is the right way to begin this discussion, but what can I tell you? Firstly, a clear war crime. I know that Omer has already pointed to war crimes, and of course, by giving these examples, he's of course blaming Israel for war crimes. I think the clearest war crime in this war from its beginning was the Hamas invasion of southern Israel and the slaughter of 1,200 Israelis, 850 of them civilians, deliberately. And then this was, of course, accompanied by mass rape, etc. These are clear war crimes. Yeah, there's no question of proportionality. Was it proportionate? Is it proportionate? These are all matters for dispute, the problem of proportionality. There's no absolute measure for understanding what is proportional and what is not proportional. Omer suggested, well, if there's 4 gunmen, he called them militants, I would call them gunmen, perhaps terrorists, hiding among or underneath 200 civilians, and 200 civilians are killed or wounded, and you kill 4, that's disproportionate. But what if the number is 50 militants or terrorists hiding among 100 civilians, and then 50 terrorists are killed and 50 civilians are killed? Is that proportionate or not? This is a ridiculous argument and a ridiculous a problem to solve in this fashion in a debate, and nobody has been able to solve it outside of this on the international stage. But there are clear war crimes in wars, and these include people lining up people and shooting them deliberately, taking prisoners of war and then shooting them deliberately, invading civilian villages and slaughtering the population there, and then raping the women and then killing them. Those are clear war crimes. As to ethnic cleansing, incidentally, Omer said that displacing people in wartime is a war crime. That's nonsense. It's not true. The Geneva Conventions and all the others do allow for the movement of people, especially out of an area which is engaged in combat, where they can actually be killed if they stay in their places. So displacing them is not a war crime. It's actually maybe even a humanitarian measure, perhaps. It depends, again, all on circumstances. What was the other category you called?
I want to jump into, because you've already started discussing different war crimes, and there's points that you both disagree on. So first, I think we all agree October 7th was a war crime. That's not a point of disagreement. Now, in terms of proportionality, I want to give you some statistics. Professor Marshall,
you mean on the 7th of October, the Hamas invasion of Israel and the murder of 850 civilians there? That's a war crime. I'm happy we agree on that.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that. So the thing that you both disagree on, and I think my opinion doesn't matter in this discussion, yours matters a lot more, is proportionality and the attacks on civilians in Gaza. So I'll give you some statistics, and I'll get your thoughts on them, Professor Morris, and we'll go back to you, Professor Bartov. So 30 to 50% of deaths are children. That's according to various sources. It varies from 30 to 50%. The only comparisons I could find was the Rwandan genocide. And I interviewed the president of Rwanda, and that genocide is indescribable that humans were able to conduct it. That was 20 to 30% of deaths were children. The Syrian civil war, heartbreaking civil war, 20 to 30% were children. Yemen civil war was 25 to 30% children. I'll give you more statistics. There were 125,000 tons of explosives that were dropped on Gaza since the war started. That's 347 tons per kilometer squared. In Vietnam, in the Vietnam War, that was 90% less, or a bit more than about 85% less, 45 tons per kilometer squared. The Korean War was 5 tons per kilometer squared. Syrian civil war, less than a ton. And the Iraq War, less than 1/10 of a ton. It compares to attacks in World War II, Battle of Stalingrad, Hamburg, and Dresden. All of them were less than what we saw in Gaza. So when it comes to proportionality, Professor Morris, do you think that the what I would call indiscriminate bombing, or many would call indiscriminate bombing, was that justified, or would you consider that a war crime? Not genocide, we're just discussing whether you think it's a war crime first.
Okay, I think the premise of your question is incorrect. I don't think there has been indiscriminate bombing of Gaza in any part of this war. I believe that the IDF and IDF intelligence zeroed in and sent in the planes to bomb places where they believed Hamas guerrillas, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, were hiding. And as they were hiding and embedded among the civilian population, a certain number of civilians also died in these bombings. But I think each attack by the Israeli Air Force, each mission is monitored, is controlled. There's a legal expert saying you can do this and you can't do that. When the attack involves known civilian concentrations, the Israelis often informed these civilian concentrations by telephone, by loudspeaker, that they're about to be attacked. This particular building is about to be attacked. And they were told to get out because there were Hamas people in the building and the Israelis didn't want them to be killed. So this is, I think, is how they were conducted. But I think there was another premise which you started with, which is, I don't know if it's correct. And that's, you're saying what the percentage of children who were killed in the Gaza war has been. And you don't know the proportion, and I don't know the proportion, and Omer doesn't know the proportion, because there has not been an accurate count of who was killed in the war. All we hear is from the Hamas health ministry in Gaza. They control it. They give out the numbers. I'm sure they exaggerate the numbers. I'm sure they include normal civilian deaths inside the war casualties, and they increase or exaggerate the number of civilian deaths as opposed to Hamas deaths, Hamas fighters' deaths. So we don't have a real reliable estimate for the proportions of people being killed in Gaza in the course of this war. You mustn't assume that the Hamas numbers are accurate, because the Hamas has been lying for decades since it was born, and is known to be a terrorist organization, is designated a terrorist organization by the United States, by the European community. Everybody agrees they're a terrorist organization, and nobody expects terrorist organization to tell you the truth about anything. Don't rely on their numbers.
Professor Bartov, there's two key points that Professor Morris made. The first one is Hamas has embedded themselves under civilian, infrastructure, under buildings, under hospitals. They've got a pretty massive tunnel system. So that's the first point. And then the second point,
among the civilians, not just under buildings. When refugees end up in a school building in the Gaza Strip, they're accompanied by Hamas terrorists who embed themselves among them. This is the problem. It's not just terrorist tunnels where you know that it's only Hamas, because the Hamas doesn't allow civilians into their tunnels. It's also where they're just sitting somewhere and there are Hamas terrorists among them. Sorry.
So that's the first. I appreciate the clarification. So that's the first point, Professor Bartov. The second point is about trusting the numbers. It's always something very difficult whenever I discuss the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, what happens anywhere in the world, just trusting the various forces. We do have the sources from Hamas, and then we do have the Lancet as well put out a report. It's a medical journal, not affiliated with Hamas, obviously, and they said that the numbers, in their opinion, are higher than what the Hamas organization is stating. I want to get your thoughts on the 2 points that Professor Morris has made.
Sure. So, when we started the debate, I was trying to define war crimes as they're defined in international law. Now, one could say that international law is nonsense, but that's what it is. And forcible displacement, for instance, is a war crime. You can move populations, request that populations move. Often, large parts of the population cannot move. They can't move because they're sick. They can't move because they're old. So international law does not allow you to simply assume, as the IDF has been doing, to say you have 24 hours or 48 hours to move, and after that, we will kill you if you're there. And that has happened over and over again. So just to correct that, there is, and you can look it up, it's very easy. You can look up definitions of war crimes. Similarly, which we haven't talked about, use of starvation, of deprivation of means to live is a war crime. It can also be a genocidal crime. And I just want to explain how war crimes can be part of genocide. They can be part of genocide if the overriding intent of those crimes, the overriding intent is to destroy the group as such, in whole or in part. That's the difference. That's the fundamental difference between war crimes that can be carried out by this or that rogue unit and genocide, which is the general policy. Now, on your questions. The first one is on data, on proportionality, and on the Hamas using the population as human shelter, as a human shield, as human shields. Look, Hamas, of course, is a criminal organization, and obviously we all agree that not only was October 7th a war crime, it was also a crime against humanity because the large numbers of civilians killed, and it could even hypothetically be defined as a genocidal crime if you tie it to the Hamas Charter of the late 1980s. But of course, the fact that one group carries out crimes, or crimes against humanity, or even genocidal crimes against another group, does not give that other group the right to do the same. That's nowhere in law, and it's nowhere in any ethics that I'm aware of. The fact that Hamas is fighting as a guerrilla force, it doesn't have tanks, it doesn't have airplanes, it doesn't have artillery, it doesn't have a navy, it has bunches of people with AK-47s and rockets. That's what it has. The fact that it is fighting in one of the most densely populated parts of the world obviously means that it's fighting within the population. There's no question about that. Of course it is. It's not fighting now. And in fact, we talk about a war in Gaza as if there is a war in Gaza. There hasn't been a war in Gaza since the summer of 2024, the latest. What you have are a few guerrilla units that come out every once in a while. Much of the casualties that the IDF is taking now is actually from its own accidents because there's attrition and lack of discipline and so forth. So it's not even a war now anymore, but the demolition and destruction has actually accelerated, not gone down in areas where there's no Hamas whatsoever. But whatever it is, if you argue that the only way to destroy Hamas is to kill vast numbers of civilians, so that's the only tactic that you can have because they are living among the civilians, then you're saying, well, I can do however many war crimes and crimes against humanity and even genocide because of the enemy. All the children, and I'll go to statistics in a minute, around 19,000 people under the age of 18 have died. Around 19,000. Just take that in. About 63, the minimal count of people killed is 63,000. There has been now a report in Israel that the figures that Israeli intelligence has, not Hamas, that Israeli intelligence has, is that they've killed fewer than 10,000 combatants that they can identify. Hamas combatants, terrorists, whatever you call them, less than 10,000, meaning that over 80% of those killed, over 80%, Netanyahu spoke about 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. This is all nonsense. Over 80% of the people killed in Gaza are civilians. So what we're talking about is to argue that if Hamas is using, let's say it's using the population as human shelters, it's fighting from within the population, and it's an organization that is criminal and terrorist. But if you say that the only way to destroy the population is to destroy Hamas, is to destroy the population of Gaza, and to completely demolish the whole place, and to do what is clearly the case, that is to make Gaza uninhabitable for its population, because that's the only way to destroy Hamas, and to remove the population from Gaza altogether, which is what the IDF has been doing from the very beginning, then that's a very strange way of justifying how you fight against a terrorist organization. You simply kill or remove all the people in the territory in which that organization is fighting you.
Professor Morris, a lot of points made. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Firstly, I don't know whether there is an intent. Firstly, Omer said that he believes that Israel is removing the population from the Gaza Strip. I don't know if that's true. So far, it hasn't been true. So far, as far as I know,
IDF has said it, Benny.
No.
The IDF is saying
finish.
it.
It's not. You said that they've been removing the population from the Gaza Strip, not from their town, one town, moving them to another town in the Gaza Strip. You're saying they removed them from the Gaza Strip. So far,
No, they can't. They want to move them.
The population of the Gaza Strip is 2.2 or 2.3 million people. And of that population, maybe 100,000 have moved out of the Strip in the course of the past 2 years, most of them to Egypt. That's as far as I know. But there hasn't been any mass removal of population out of the Gaza Strip. Now, it's true that President Trump and Netanyahu have said that they would be interested in transferring or voluntarily transferring large parts of the Gaza population out of the Gaza Strip. This they've said, but this hasn't been done by the IDF in the past 3 years. They haven't done that. So it's
because there's nobody
that.
to take
now,
them
there
in,
have
Benny,
been
you know that.
removals of population from various towns or various areas inside towns to other places in the same towns or out of the same towns, but still in the Gaza Strip. Then you can ask whether you can say or ask whether that's a war crime or not. I don't think it is if the intent isn't to remove them from the territory itself. And as I said, it's also humanitarian in the sense that you don't want people to be killed in a combat zone and in buildings which you're about to attack, and you tell them to leave. Well, this saves lives, doesn't kill lives. If the ultimate intent of Israel was, and the policy was, and will be realized, of removing the population of the Gaza Strip from the Gaza Strip to Egypt or Jordan or to Canada or wherever, there you will have ethnic cleansing. If that is the intent of the government, and if that is the policy of the government, and if that's what's carried out. But so far, this hasn't happened on that point. The figures Omer gave, I think, for the proportions between combatants and non-combatants killed, as far as I know, isn't 10,000 Hamas people killed, but it's closer to 20,000 Hamas killed, out of something like maybe 60,000 Gazans killed, but we don't even know if that figure is correct, because we don't have accurate figures. We have figures of the Hamas Health Ministry. Now, the proportion of 2 to 1, some people say is legitimate. I don't really know what's a legitimate percentage of civilians killed in collateral damage when you're fighting guerrillas and you try to kill them and you kill 2 civilians for each fighter you killed. I don't know if that's a legitimate proportion, not legitimate proportion, but if those are the figures, you have to stick to them. Some people have said that the Americans in Iraq, for example, killed many more per fighter, many more civilians per each fighter that they ended up killing. I don't know, but again, we're talking about numbers which we don't know. We don't really know the numbers because they really derive from the Hamas Health Ministry, and all of the various reports which come out in Lancet and other places, again, are based primarily on the Hamas source.
Benny, can I just make,
go ahead, Professor.
Can I just make a comment on this, because this is an argument that is being made over and over again.
Maybe it's a good
numbers
argument.
Well, if you repeat an argument many times, it doesn't make it correct. The fact of the matter is that the numbers that we have are not from Hamas. The numbers are from the health ministry there. And the numbers are not simply numbers.
No, but the health ministry
those numbers, and wait, those numbers
you can't separate Hamas from the health ministry.
Numbers, just a minute, those numbers are connected to names. All these numbers that you have, and that's why they're considered to be conservative numbers. The actual number is likely much higher than that. All these numbers are connected to people who have been registered by name, who have been identified as individuals. These are not numbers that just are thrown out there. And because there are many people who were killed, an estimated 10,000, for instance, who are under the ruins and have not been identified, the numbers are likely much higher. But when I say now 63,000, These 63,000 have names. They have been registered.
Some of the
So
names
the
are made
Israeli
up. You know
government,
that. Some of the names are people who died long ago. Some of
you
them
may
are
know
not.
that. You may know that. I don't know that. I know that all these numbers have been identified by name, and this health ministry, which obviously is under the rule of Hamas, if it has any rule anymore in Gaza, which is kind of doubtful, but that health ministry, for that reason, has been very careful in showing that, and this has been widely shared also in the Israeli press, by the way, that all these numbers are connected to names. That's very important to understand that. The second thing, as I said, and there's not been a response, the figure of those killed, of those militants killed, comes from the IDF. This is not a Hamas number.
I've never seen
The
that number.
IDF
I've never seen
intelligence.
that number.
It was published both in Local Core and in The Guardian, and it's directly from IDF intelligence sources.
Yeah, local
9,000 and
Yeah,
something.
so
I've never
I've got
seen
the
that.
article. It was published by The Guardian in August, so this month, earlier this month. Local call as well as 972 magazine. I just looked it up while you're speaking. And Professor Marsh, just a quick question to you, sir. If those numbers are accurate, you're casting doubt on those numbers from the health ministry, and it's a valid doubt because it is
And I'm
Hamas. How can we trust
casting
them?
doubt on the proportion of fighters versus civilians, which Omer is saying stems from the IDF. The numbers I know from the IDF are something like 20,000 Hamas and the Islamic Jihad fighters, as opposed to whatever the other number is, 30,000 or 40,000. That's the numbers I know.
So I really suggest, Benny, that you look up these two articles, because they show, first of all, the extraordinary discrepancy in numbers provided by the IDF. The IDF has been completely inconsistent in the numbers that it gave.
So you're saying we
It gave
can't
high
depend on
numbers.
the IDF numbers. You just
No.
quoted them.
What I'm saying is that the IDF, its spokespeople, have come up with all kinds of numbers,
Right.
which is quite common. We know that the Americans fighting in Vietnam had body counts, and the body counts were usually exaggerated. Armies fighting these kind of wars usually exaggerate the number of people they kill.
Yeah.
This figure came through the intelligence community in Israel, which has been trying to determine precisely how many people they actually killed. They need to know that, of course. And it's good to have that intelligence. And it turns out that their own figures are less than 10,000. That's a high number.
I've never seen those
So
figures.
this is based here. So Professor, this is a leaked document. So obviously you could, whether you want to trust it or believe it or not is up to you. If the numbers are just, sorry, Professor, I know it's hypothetical, but if the numbers are accurate, would your stance change, or wouldn't change too much from what you said earlier on proportionality?
Okay, let's talk about genocide. I told you the problem of proportionality is it's not defined clearly. There is no legal definition of proportionality. How much is legal and how much is illegal? This is a silly argument. Actually, it's just not worth getting into it. What isn't a silly argument is talking about genocide, which is what we really should be talking about, since that's the subject of this debate. Genocide, as far as I looked it up. Actually, you can look up the UN definition from the 1948 convention, the Genocide Convention. But I would begin looking at genocide first from the common sense definition, which is also the Oxford English Dictionary definition of genocide, which reads actually the deliberate and systematic killing or persecution of people from a particular group identified as having shared ethnicity, nationality, with the intention of partially or wholly destroying that group. That's the Oxford English Dictionary definition of genocide. The 1948 United Nations Geneva Convention, adopted in defines genocide more widely. Some of it is silly. One of the definitions of genocide is killing members of a group. You kill two people from a group. The Hamas kills two Israelis on the 7th of October. That's called genocide, according to one of the definitions offered by this United Nations Genocide Convention. I would stick to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is not political and doesn't have various political pressures on it to define genocide. And they defined it simply as, and that's how most people understand the word, the deliberate and systematic killing or persecution of people from a particular group. That's genocide. Now, you have to, in order to convince me that the Israeli government is committing genocide and has been committing genocide for the past 3 years in Gaza, you have to show me that that has been the intent and that is the policy, and there is a systematic execution of this policy in which soldiers go around killing as many civilians as they can of a certain group. As happened, of course, as Omer knows, in the genocide he investigated in Europe during the Holocaust, and as I investigated the genocide committed by the Muslim Turks against the Christian populations of Turkey 100 years ago or so. There you will find that civilians were busy killing as many Christians as they could in Turkey, or they were killing as many Jews as they could in massacres in systematic fashion as an element or as a function of a policy decision, and if you like, as an ideology on which this policy was based. I don't find that in the Gaza Strip. Soldiers in the Gaza, Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip have been fighting there among civilians in various places, in fact, dominating civilian populations. And I haven't even heard of one massacre carried out by Israeli ground troops of civilians, that is, lining up civilians and shooting them to death deliberately. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen rape. Mass rape always accompanies genocide. The Turks raped tens of thousands of Christian women in the destruction of the Armenian and Greek and Assyrian communities in Turkey. I haven't seen even one case of rape in the actual fighting in the Gaza Strip. There have been one or two cases of rapes, apparently of interned or detained Gazans by prison guards. But actually in the Gaza Strip, no massacres, no rapes. What you do have is large numbers of civilians killed in bombings, which I explained are something which was monitored, which was organized, and was directed against Hamasniks. There may have been mistakes there. They may have the bombs may have actually hit civilians instead of the Hamas concentration they were trying to hit. But usually, I assume the pilots were pretty accurate. We've seen them being very accurate in Iran not too long ago. They're actually very skilled pilots, and they have very accurate munitions. Often they use these accurate munitions. And I think that they are not trying to kill people. And as I said, civilians. And as I said, in many cases, civilians were warned to get out of areas or buildings which were going to be targeted. This is not how genocide is being carried out in the past 100 years by Germans, Turks, etc.
So let me, Professor Bartov, I'll let you respond. There's a lot of points made here by Benny. The first point is intent. I think this is something that's so difficult to prove because you can go back to previous wars. What's happened in Syria is just disgusting and heartbreaking, still happening today. What's happened during World War II, the bombing of various cities, what's happened in Korea, Vietnam, decades ago. A lot of death and destruction. Some numbers you can compare to what's happening in Gaza. Others is not as bad. But that wasn't genocide. That was just maybe no care for civilian life. You can make that argument, but it wasn't genocide. So I think intent is one thing that's very difficult to prove that Benny talks about. And then the other point is proportionality. So Israel has shown the capability of being able to strike specific targets. They've done this incredibly well in Lebanon. They've done it incredibly well in Iran. Are they doing it well? I know we've already talked about this topic. Are they doing it well in Gaza? A counter argument to this that sometimes crosses my mind, and maybe Benny can give me your thoughts on that, is that they've done so well in Lebanon and Iran. Why can't they do it as well in Gaza, considering they've got a lot more data, a lot more intelligence on Gaza? They pretty much had the country almost under their control for so many years. So why couldn't they have those same precision strikes in Gaza as they've had elsewhere? That's the question I ask myself. A lot of points there to cover, Professor Bartov.
So look, I mean, just on the very quickly on the issue of precision, yes, the Israeli Air Force can be very precise. No, it has not been at all precise in Gaza. Had it been precise in Gaza, then you wouldn't have such a vast number of civilians killed. And the IDF, of course, the Air Force, is working with coordinates that it's being given. It's not just bombing anywhere that it likes. It's being told where to bomb. But the instructions that it's being...
With the intent of killing Hamasniks.
With the intent of killing members of Hamas if they're at home in a multi-story building, allowed to kill next to a Hamas operative between 20 and 100 people. So the proportions given to the IDF, and we know all of that by now. This is not some secret.
Of the strikes to kill Hamas people. This is what you're agreeing on that.
Yes. If you wanted to kill the chief of staff of Israel by killing 500,000 people in Tel Aviv, that would not be correct, right? You could aim very directly at the bunker where the Israeli high command is. Everybody knows where it is. But if you dropped a vast number of munitions there, because that would kill them for sure, you would also kill thousands of civilians. And the question is, because that's what the Israeli Air Force has been doing and has been allowed to do, was given coordinates of where these people were sleeping with their families in multi-story buildings that no longer exist because everybody there was destroyed. And that's why Gaza looks like it does. If you look at the aerial photographs, the strip is stripped of its buildings. But I don't want to go there too far because I think this is... this argument will not take us very far. I want to talk about genocide. So genocide, as you said, Mario, you need two things for genocide, to identify genocide. You need to identify an intent to destroy a group in whole or in part as such. And we can't work with all due respect, we can't work with the Oxford definition. We have to work with the UN Convention. That's the only definition of genocide that matters in international law. No other definition, not mine, not Benny's, not the Oxford Dictionary. None of these matter. The only one that matters in international law is the one by the UN Convention of 1948, period.
But there is common sense. You should apply common sense as well.
Common sense is fantastic, but it doesn't matter in international law. You need a definition. Now, that definition calls for two things: to identify an intent to destroy a particular group in whole or in part, and the implementation of that intent.
Yeah.
Now, for me, immediately after October 7th, which we all agree was a war crime and crime against humanity, and we need not talk about that, the Hamas attack itself, immediately thereafter, there were multiple statements by Israeli politicians, by the Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, and so forth, which had a genocidal content. That is, they spoke about flattening it, destroying it, nobody's uninvolved, no water, no food, they're all human animals, and they should be treated as such. All these statements were made. Yep. But then the Israeli government also said what its war goals were, and those appeared reasonable. The war goals were to destroy Hamas and release the hostages. That's another war crime, of course. And that appeared reasonable. To me, by May of 2024, it appeared that what the IDF was engaged in was not trying to accomplish these two war goals, because it did not destroy Hamas. He wasn't trying to destroy Hamas, and he wasn't trying to release the hostages, and neither of those tasks have been accomplished to this day. Most of the hostages released, if they were not killed, were released through ceasefire agreements and exchange of prisoners. What it was trying to do, by May of 2024, it became clear, was to actually accomplish what those statements had said at the beginning. We have to flatten Gaza. That's what it was doing. Every time that the IDF told people, leave your home, it's a humanitarian gesture, because otherwise you will die. This place is going to be an area of operations. When people left their homes were destroyed. Their homes were flattened. They had no place to come back to. And Netanyahu said in early May this year, he said, we have destroyed their homes. They cannot go back to their homes. Our only problem is to find countries that will take them in. We haven't found those countries yet. Yeah. So the goal of the IDF was to implement what the government told it to do, which was to move the population to the extent that it could to the south, destroy its homes so it couldn't go back, not only homes, but universities, schools, mosques, and then to try and find a way to move them out. Obviously, the problem is nobody wants to take them in. There is no place for them to go. So instead of moving them out, there is a process of debilitating the population through a policy of deprivation, as Gallant said already on October 7th. Deprivation of food, water, deliberate. This is not, by the way, indiscriminate bombing. This is deliberate destruction. To call it indiscriminate is wrong. There's been a deliberate destruction of the entire medical services in Gaza,
So we'll give
the hospital,
Professor, just
targeting of doctors.
Professor Marcel, I'll give you the time to respond to all the points. Especially, there's one quote you mentioned, Professor Bartov, about the intent is that there's no place for the Palestinians to go. You know, we've destroyed Palestine. Can you mention the exact quote, who it was by? Because I'd love Professor Morris to respond to that quote on finding a place for Palestinians to go to.
This is a quote of Netanyahu. Obviously, it was leaked. He said it in a defense committee meeting, but he never denied it. And it's been said by many of his other ministers in the cabinet that the goal, he said, we destroy their houses. They have no place to go back to. The only problem we have is to find countries that will take them in. What you're saying is that shows intent. Professor Morris, I'll let you respond because a lot of points made here by Omer. I'd love you to respond. If you can start with that quote, whether that concerns you, if that is their intent, and whether that shows intent, and then obviously respond to all the other points by Professor Bartov.
I think I addressed this before. I think there has been a desire on Netanyahu's part, on Trump's part, to depopulate the Gaza Strip. And destroying houses would certainly help in that sense, because people would lose their homes and would have to seek homes elsewhere. If you could find homes elsewhere to settle them
would you consider that genocidal or not? Just want to get your thoughts on this point.
No, that's ethnic cleansing. What I'm saying, though, is that in the absence of places where you can send the population outside the Gaza Strip, this is like dreaming. It's like a will of the wisp. It's fantasia. They're not going anywhere. And I think the Israeli government understood this more or less from the beginning. But the moment Trump issued this idea of turning Gaza into Riviera after transferring the population, Netanyahu jumped on it and said, yeah, it's a very good idea. Very stupidly, that's what he did. And therefore, he's also stamped with this idea of ethnic cleansing as his goal. I don't think that any Israeli leaders today believe that the Gazan population is going anywhere. Does that mean that the Israelis intend to murder them all? I don't think so. I don't think that's what the Air Force has been doing. I don't think that's what the ground forces have been doing, trying to kill as many of this ethnic group as possible. And therefore, I don't think genocide is applicable here at all. It's not connected. Not to mention all sorts of other things like a mass rape, taking away the children and bringing them up as some other ethnic group, as the Russians are doing with Ukrainians. This hasn't happened in Gaza Strip, is not happening in the Gaza Strip, and is irrelevant in effect.
But you believe, just to make sure your stance, you believe that what Netanyahu said, if that does become intent, or they would like to achieve that, or it becomes policy by the IDF, then you called it ethnic cleansing. You're against that. You're against expelling Palestinians out of Gaza, but you don't think that's their intent.
If they intended to throw the Gazan population out of the Gaza Strip, remove them completely, that would be ethnic cleansing. I don't think it's clear that that's the policy, because I think they don't think it's practical. I don't know if they know whether they think it's moral or not, but I think they understand it's not practical, and therefore that is not the government policy. What it has been doing is moving about population and destroying their homes, under which hide the Hamasniks, and that's the only way of getting at them. And therefore, they kept moving populations back and forth so that they can get hold of the Hamas people and kill them in the various places. Today, they're talking about the Gaza City. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to actually try and conquer the Gaza City, but they talk about it, again, to remove the population southward so that the Hamas battalions or whatever exists there can be destroyed in the Gaza Strip. But it's not part of a genocidal program to kill all or many or most of the Gaza population. It's aimed at killing the Hamas fighters and destroying that organization. As to the hostages, incidentally, the hostages, most of them were released. Some were killed in captivity. Most were released as a result of Israeli military pressure, not because Hamasniks wanted to give them up. Israel attacked
not true.
places, and the Hamasniks were afraid that they were also going to be taken out. So they preferred to release the hostages in exchange for Hamas prisoners in Israeli jails and to get 60 days or whatever it is of ceasefire in which they could regroup, recoup, and whatever. It's not because I don't know how Omer put it. How did you say that they didn't care about releasing hostages? This wasn't the intent of the Israeli government. I think that's nonsense. I hate
Benny,
government.
Benny.
Let me finish. I hate the Netanyahu's government. I think it's an awful government. I think they haven't handled the war properly, but I think that they do really intend and have intended to get the hostages released and succeeded in getting most of them released as a result, in effect, of military pressure, which persuaded the Hamas that it was better to negotiate and to release them in exchange for whatever they were getting in exchange for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's too much here to respond to everything. I'll just say first, already in May of 2024, there was an agreement on the table that President Biden at the time said Israel had agreed to, which would have meant that Israel would receive all the hostages for a large number of prisoners who are described in Israel as terrorists, but many of them are actually under administrative arrest. They haven't even been charged with anything. We don't know what they're charged with. And for Israel to move out of the Gaza Strip. And Israel then reneged on that, said, no, we did not agree. The return of hostages for prisoners could have been carried out well over a year ago. Most people in Israel know that very well. What the government's position is on, or Netanyahu's position on, we have to accomplish complete victory, which he cannot define, means that you have to completely destroy Gaza. And what the IDF is engaged in now is not in fighting. And it hasn't been engaged in fighting. The IDF itself is saying that. It's engaged in demolition. It's destroying houses, hundreds of houses. No, I'm not. Let me finish.
It's demolishing and fighting.
Sorry, let me finish. It's engaged, and that is information coming.
Your descriptions are much too black and white for a very gray war.
Yes, it's not very gray. It's dark,
That's what
but
I'm
it's not very
saying.
gray.
Everything you see is in black and white.
Benny,
it's either or.
Benny, I let you speak, so let me also speak. The IDF is primarily engaged in demolitions. Officers there have called it an operation of ceiling to floor. That's what they're doing, ceiling to floor, demolishing hundreds of... In fact, they don't have enough forces to do it, and so they are actually bringing in contractors, civilian contractors, being very well paid from Israel, paid by the house, protected by the IDF. Some of the losses of the IDF have been from protecting these bulldozers, these civilian bulldozers, and large numbers of bulldozers have now been sent from the US to continue this operation of demolition. Now, let me say something about the connection between ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's very important to understand. I do believe that the policy of the Israeli government, since it sort of came out of the shock of the attack by Hamas, people in the government, including Netanyahu, saw this as an opportunity rather than a fiasco, which of course it was. And the opportunity was, if we cannot manage the conflict, which was Netanyahu's former policy, then we have to somehow resolve it differently. And the way to resolve it was to try and remove the population of Gaza, or as much of it as possible, from Gaza. That's very hard to do, of course, because people don't like moving from their homes. Sometimes they can't, sometimes they don't want to, sometimes they have no place to go to. This happened also with the Jews in World War II. So ethnic cleansing when your goal is ethnic cleansing and you cannot get rid of the population, there's no place for it to go, it becomes a genocidal operation. That is, you create conditions that make it impossible for that group to survive. Now, I want to just quote some figures for that, not just the number of people who died. You know, there has been a rise of 300% in miscarriages among Palestinian women in Gaza since October 7th. Every 20% of all children born in Gaza since the war began because of lack of food are either prematurely born or underweight. And because the medical services have been completely destroyed, including targeted, as I said before, almost completely destroyed.
Yeah.
Almost completely destroyed. These children are likely to die. Gaza now is the capital of the world in terms of mutilated children, of children lacking limbs. It's the largest concentration in the world of children lacking limbs. Half of the population of Gaza are under the age of 18. Most of these children have been both mentally traumatized by this ongoing war and have been deprived of food. Even if they don't die from it, will be stunted for the rest of their lives.
I agree with
this
you
is an operation.
So Professor Marsh, I'd love you to respond to this. I'll add 3 more statistics and love to get your thoughts. Food aid, according to World Food Program and IRC, is down 95%. Medical supplies down 95% since pre-war, according to UNICEF and UNRWA. And fuel is down 90%. You seem to agree that you don't condone the blockade of aid and food, medical supplies and food supplies and fuel.
It's a terrible mistake on the part of the Israeli government. The 2 months.
And what do you think is the and I'll let you respond to all the points. Yes, sir. I'll let you respond to all the points and the intent behind it, because I think intent is really important when it comes to genocide.
I think the intent was to destroy the Hamas. I think it was to force the population, to persuade the Gaza population to turn on the Hamas. That was the idea of cutting off food. I think it was a mistake. They didn't manage to turn the population against the Hamas.
Is that called? Sorry to interrupt. Is that called collective punishment? Is that a war crime, or you don't think?
Probably is a war crime. Yes,
but not genocidal.
But I think I don't think it's genocidal. I don't think the intent has been to kill the population in the Gaza Strip. In fact, I'm willing to bet you, incidentally, that in 10 years' time, the population of the Gaza Strip will be at least 2.3 million Gazan Arabs, maybe much larger, because they have actually quite a lot of births as well. They have a high birth rate. I'm willing to bet that in 10 years' time, the Gaza Strip will have many more Arabs living in it than live in it today. So I think that in itself would disprove Omer's designation of what's happening as genocide. But that's speculation. That's 10 years' time.
That's like saying that the existence of the state of Israel means that there was no Holocaust.
The Israeli government did try to block the arrival of food and also probably medical supplies during a 2-month period between March and May of this year. Before then, I think they restricted the arrival of humanitarian aid, but it did come in. People didn't starve for the first 2 years of the war. Today, there are probably pockets of starvation in the Gaza Strip, but I don't think there is a policy at the moment of starving the population. I think the Israeli government has been trying, maybe incorrectly, maybe not very effectively, to get the Gaza population to have food. Unfortunately, this 2-month stoppage has caused a lot of malnutrition and probably pockets of actual starvation. And to this, you have to add, of course, that the Hamas does take a lot of food off the food trucks. It prevents various people from getting to the actual food distribution centers. So the Hamas has also had its hand in this, in creating this food problem. But I don't think the food problem or the lack of medical aid is designed to kill the Gaza population. This is what Omer has been saying. It's genocide. This is what they're trying to do. I don't think that's what the Israeli government is busy doing.
Can I ask you one more question, Professor Morris? Just one more question, sir. We'll go to you, Omer, afterwards. Benny, just some of the statements. I know you know some of these statements. I want to get your thoughts on them. There's too many to list, but some of the notable ones here is you've got the defense minister. Worst one is where is it? Ben-Gvir said the only thing that needs to enter. Yes. Okay, the only thing that needs to enter. And my question, the reason I want to read some of these statements is to ask whether they show intent. That worries me. is the only thing that needs to enter Gaza are hundreds of tons of explosive from the Air Force, not an ounce of humanitarian aid. We've got Gottlieb from the Knesset saying, Jericho missile, strategic doomsday weapon. This is my opinion, talking about annihilating Gaza. You've got Amitai talking, we wouldn't have the Nazis humanitarian aid. There is no such thing as uninvolved civilians. You know the statements, there's a lot of them. What are your thoughts when you hear them?
Have heard these statements. We have a lot of stupid ministers. We have a lot of messianic ministers in this cabinet. It's the worst Israeli government. It's the worst Israeli cabinet ever put together. And people have had very loose tongues and say what what simply drives them is revenge, etc. And they let loose with various phrases, including, as you said, one of them even talked about atom bombing the Gaza Strip at some point at the beginning of the war. None of this represents Israeli government policy. It's true that we have a defense minister who's pretty stupid and does say stupid things, but again, he doesn't really determine policy. He's a lackey in the cabinet. The only person who actually determines policy is Netanyahu, and the person who's supposed to carry it out is the head of the defense staff, that is the head of the army, who actually opposes Netanyahu and keeps telling him we can't conquer the city of Gaza, as the cabinet has decided to do. And apparently he's stalling and keeping his troops away from actually launching this attack, which would probably result in a lot of additional civilian deaths, as well as Israeli military deaths, as well as hostages deaths.
Omer.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, just two things. First, this demographic argument that, say, in 5 or 10 years, there would be more Palestinians in Gaza than there are now. To me, it sounds like saying, well, I mean, Israel now has a much larger population than it did in 1948. Jewish population, so maybe that sort of pays back for the Holocaust. It makes no sense to me. Genocide is not about what the projected population in 10 or 15 years would be. Genocide is a policy to destroy a particular group in whole or in part, and often it doesn't succeed. The Holocaust in that sense didn't succeed. The Armenian genocide in that sense didn't succeed. There are Armenians today, there are Jews today, but the intent was to destroy the group as such, and they were pretty successful to the extent that they could. That's one thing. The second is, when I speak about the entire project of what Israel is doing, and Netanyahu is not the most moderate person in his cabinet. He is surrounded by, as Benny says rightly, by a lot of crazy people, but his own policy has changed. His own policy has become a policy of trying to make Gaza uninhabitable for its population, with the hope that somehow, if not all, then large numbers of those people, because the world will realize that they are living in, as Trump said, and indeed Netanyahu immediately jumped on that, but it was not invented by Trump. It was just seen as a carte blanche given by Trump to Israel, whose policy has been since the week 2 or week 3 after October 7th to make Gaza uninhabitable. What do you do? How do you create that? Well, you try to destroy the houses, we agree on that, and destroy everything else, universities, museums, hospitals, so that you can't live there and you can't reconstitute yourself as a group. Even if the IDF eventually leaves, which it probably won't, but even if it does, they won't be able to rebuild themselves as a group, and then tell the international community, look, I mean, these people are suffering terribly. They have no food. They're dying of hunger. Please take them in. And then Canada will say, okay, we'll take 20,000 in, and South Sudan more likely is being bribed by the United States and Israel to take some of them in. That is the policy. Now, it's an ethnic cleansing policy, right. Yes.
It's not genocide.
It's an ethnic cleansing policy whose outcome is genocidal.
No.
Because what it is doing, it is destroying the group as such. And if you read the Genocide Convention, And if you read Lemkin and understand what Raphael Lemkin meant when he came up with that definition, which was accepted by the international community, it's not about killing everyone. It's about destroying their ability to remain as a group. If you take a group away from its land, you disperse it in other places, you debilitate its next generation, you stunt them, you are doing everything you can. You may fail, but your goal is to destroy that group as as such.
Yeah, well, the response I already said, I think the response is pretty clear. It may be that Netanyahu and maybe some of his cabinet ministers, probably most of them, were thinking in terms of ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip, removing the population. I think by now they understand they're not going anywhere. The place has been devastated. Its buildings, its structures, etc., are devastated. And I think Israel and the international community agree that the international community will intervene and will rebuild Gaza. That's apparently what's going to happen in the coming years. And the population will remain in place and move out of the tents they're in now and eventually move back into housing. That's probably what's going to happen because there hasn't been ethnic cleansing. And I don't think that the government of Israel today believes that ethnic cleansing is going to work. It's not practical. Maybe some of them even think it's immoral and it's not going to happen. But all of this is not genocide. That's what I'm saying.
So,
Lemkin, or it wasn't even Lemkin, but the destruction of a group in the sense of destroying its infrastructure, its concrete infrastructure, and removing the buildings and forcing them out of a certain place, that might have been the vision of some people. I don't think it's practical. I don't think it's going to happen. I certainly don't think it's moral. And I think you'll end up with a Gaza Strip rebuilt with millions of Arabs, most of them of the original population, living there again. That's how I see it.
Can I just cite just one thing quickly? So in the UN definition of genocide, in the Convention of 1948, the elements that make these acts, which are genocidal acts, include killing members of the group. It doesn't sound many, but the general understanding is many. It's interpreted as many. It's causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. That obviously has happened.
It's also happened to Israelis, incidentally.
Yes, but on a much...
And mental harm also happened to Israelis, though not in the same extent, of course.
But on a much larger scale.
Yes.
And again, genocide does not justify genocide, whatever we say. It's deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. That clearly has happened. And it's imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And as I cited, that actually has happened. That is, it's the fate of children.
Israeli government policy to prevent births. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Benny, just a quick yes or no question to both of you gentlemen, and then I'll wrap up with one final question is, I know your answers, Omer, to all three. Benny, I think I know the answer to one, and the others I can only guess. So, Omer, do you think Israel, yes or no, do you think Israel is committing genocide, Omer?
Yes.
Benny?
Yeah, I don't think so. But just to return to the business of births, I certainly agree with Omer that what's happened in the Gaza Strip has probably caused terrible medical problems, including bad births and high rate of deaths among births and defects and so on. I don't think that was government policy. I don't think anybody in the government actually talked about it and decided this is what we're going to do by preventing medical aid reaching the hospitals, etc.
If a minister of defense,
what's been happening?
It's not a side effect. If a minister of defense says they will have no water, they will have no food, they will have no power.
Yeah, but
that means the babies will die.
This was said at the beginning, and it wasn't implemented then. So this was just a statement because they were bad.
No.
They were intent on revenge. Gallant and the others, after what happened on October 7th, wanted to take revenge. And this is why they said no water, no electricity, no this, no that. None of that happened.
The famine in Gaza now is a result of all these policies. It's not only a result of what happened when Israel unilaterally broke the ceasefire in March. There has been on and off lack of supplies for 2 years now. This is why, as I said, this is why you have now a rise since October 7th of miscarriages, 300%. That didn't start in March. So this has been a policy of allowing as little as possible food, water, clean water, medical assistance, sanitation. The population
I think some of this is true, but the intent of all this was to break the will of the population and force the Hamas to give up. This is what it was all designed to do, not to kill people.
On that point, then, Benny, do you think? So you don't think Israel's committed genocide, Benny? Do you think Israel's committed ethnic cleansing? Yes or no?
It hasn't even done that. It hasn't even done that. There has been an intent to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip. I think most people understood that this wasn't realistic. Many people thought it was immoral, and therefore it hasn't happened. There's still 2.2 million Arabs living in the Gaza Strip, and that will be the case in a year and 2 years and 3 years and 10 years' time, except the numbers will increase, of course.
So you think there was intent at one stage, but they haven't actually gone ahead with it?
I think when Netanyahu heard Trump talking about ethnic cleansing, which they called voluntary transfer or removal, and he said, yes, it's a good idea, and probably thought maybe this is realistic. But I think he found out within a few days that nobody in the world is going to take in Palestinians. One reason, of course, is because Palestinians, wherever they've reached in large numbers, they've always been subversive. In Lebanon, they tried to overthrow the government or cause the civil war. In Jordan, they tried to overthrow the government. In other words, nobody really wanted Palestinians in large numbers inside their doors. And the Israeli government understood that and therefore said, well, ethnic cleansing is not a realistic idea.
Omer, the answer, I'm guessing, on your end is yes. Israel's, in your mind, has committed ethnic cleansing?
Well, of course. I mean, it's what it's done. It tried to concentrate the Palestinians. Now, the Palestinians in Gaza are in 25% of the territory, and it's trying now. It may not succeed in doing it, but now it's trying to move another up to 1 million people who are in Gaza City, further south. So the policy is to move the population to the south, to be on the Egyptian border, and with the hope that somehow they can be then filtered out, maybe not all of them, but as many as possible. That is the policy. It's a policy of ethnic cleansing. Whether it'll succeed or not, we don't know.
One thing you both agree on is that Israel has committed war crimes in one form or another. I think you both agree on that. Last question to wrap up the debate. Is an incredible discussion. Obviously, we could discuss it for a few more hours because it is a complex topic. Benny, I'm going to start with you. What would you need to see to change your position? Actually, I'll go with Omer first. Omer, what would you need to see to change your position on whether Israel has committed genocide? So you think Israel is committing genocide? What would change your mind? What do you need to see on the ground?
It's very hard to answer that question because I think there's sufficient evidence to show that it is a genocidal policy. As I said, I think the goal, and I think on this Benny and I agree, the goal is ethnic cleansing. I think it became the goal much earlier on. I think the statements made immediately after the war, the attack by Hamas, were not simply made at the heat of the moment, but in fact reflected as we found a pattern of operations, which is another way to show intent. That's what the ICJ has ruled. So there has been a pattern of operations.
If a peace agreement is reached now, for example, and they start rebuilding Gaza in 2 weeks' time, I know it's highly unlikely. But with that, and I question your current conclusion.
Yes. So if Israel were, I think, forced to change the paradigm, the political paradigm, and to realize that the only way, and I think Benny and I agree on that, I've read him writing about that, the only solution to this issue is to find a way for Jews and Palestinians to share that space, not to kill each other, because they will keep doing it. But that will not reverse what happened. There may be then truth and reconciliation. There may be all kind of processes to come to terms with it. But what happened has happened. And if people don't pay a price for it, if there's no retribution, if people are not brought to account, people like Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, obviously Gallant, Israel Katz now, who speaks about creating a concentration camp, humanitarian city, so-called, on the ruins of Rafah. If those people are not brought to account, then what we have is whatever happens with Israel-Palestine is a catastrophe for human rights and the rule of law around the world, because you have to bring people to account for what they did. That cannot be reversed by whatever they do in the future.
Will anybody? Do you think that anybody will bring to account Palestinian leaders in any way? Do you expect that? Do you think they should be?
Hamas leaders, yeah,
For anything.
absolutely, but they're mostly dead. Yeah,
Well,
but they're dead.
Thankfully, Israel managed to bring them to account, at least the Hamas leaders in the
Well,
Gaza
he didn't bring them to account. He shot them, and it's always better. It's always better to have a
It's not
judicial
bad way to-
process.
For people who
No.
murder lots of people, that's not a bad way to bring them
It's
to
actually
account.
it is
my
a
view.
bad way.
No,
It
well,
is
I
a
don't
bad
find it
way.
a bad way. I think it's something which is
wait.
memorable. But no, to be serious though, I think that a two-state solution is the only ideal solution, which will give both people a modicum of justice. A state based in the West Bank with the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, perhaps in confederation with Jordan, that sort of Palestinian state side by side with Israel in its 1949 borders, that would be the ideal solution. The problem is I don't see it happening. I think both populations at this stage don't want a two-state solution. The Palestinians have never wanted a Jewish state anywhere in Palestine and any part of Palestine. The Jews were agreeable to a two-state solution in 1937, 1947, the year 2000, the year 2008. The Palestinians always said no. And today the Israeli public is so pushed rightwards by what happened around the Gaza Strip on the 7th of October that the Israeli population also at this stage is unwilling to see a two-state solution.
And the question, what would you need to see to change your position on whether Israel has committed or is committing genocide? Is it something that you'd see on the ground?
I'd have to see actual genocide. People shooting down lots of people deliberately, people being put in gas chambers, people being thrown into the sea. The things which happen in genocides, these things have not been happening in the Gaza Strip.
Gentlemen, really appreciate the conversation. I would love to have it again. And I think there's a lot of unanswered questions, but that would take, a 6-8 hour discussion. I appreciate both of your time.